The
In first
richest woman
class,
on that
the
airplane
CEO's
was on her
baby
knees in
suddenly
the
stopped
first-class
breathing,
aisle,
and
screaming a
everyone
baby that had stopped breathing. And not one of the important people up there could do a single thing about
Help
it.
me, somebody, please.
The flight attendants were frantic.
Sir, please
A
stay
man
calm.
was shouting for a doctor, and there wasn't one. 30,000 feet over the middle of the country, in a cabin full of executives and money, the most powerful person on that plane was helpless, and her baby was turning the wrong color. And the only person in the entire aircraft who knew what to do was sitting 16 rows back in seat 22A in coach with his 8-year-old son. That was me, and what I needed to save that baby's life was a drinking straw. I'm going to tell you the whole story, what happened with that straw and the woman, and the thing my son said afterward that I'll remember until the day I die. But more than that, I'm going to tell you why I almost wasn't on that plane as the man who could help. Because the truth is, I was flying that day to quit. To walk away from the work I'd done for 15 years. And that baby and that straw gave me back something I'd just about lost. Before I get into it, let me say one quick thing, and then I won't interrupt again. In my line of work, you learn there's no time for big speeches. Somebody's down in front of you, you don't make a pitch, you just do the thing that needs doing. So I won't pitch you, I'll just tell you that this is a story about what a human life is actually worth, and what the people who save them are actually worth, and if that's something you want to sit with, hit subscribe so the next one can find you. That's it. Now let me back up to who I am. My name is Dean Walsh. I'm 39 years old, and for 15 years I was a paramedic, an ambulance medic. The person who comes when you call 911 and your life is falling apart, the car wreck, the heart attack, the kid who isn't breathing, the worst day of a stranger's life, over and over, shift after shift for 15 years. It is the most important work I know how to do, and I was good at it. I was very good at it. Let me try to make you understand what that work is, because most people only meet a paramedic on the worst day of their life, and then they never think about us again. For 15 years, my office was other people's catastrophes. I have knelt on the highway in the rain with my hands inside the worst day a family will ever have. I have brought people back who were technically already gone, felt a heart restart under my palms, watched eyes open that had closed. I have held the hand of a frightened old man in the back of a rig at 3 in the morning and told him he was going to be okay and been right, and other nights been wrong and had to carry that home. I have delivered 2 babies on bathroom floors. I have talked a kid down off a ledge of a different kind. You learn, doing that work, that there is no such thing as an ordinary human being. Every single person is somebody's whole world, and any one of them can become, in an instant, the most important emergency in the universe. And you learn to be calm in the exact moment everyone else falls apart, because your steadiness is the one thing they can hold on to. That was my whole life for 15 years. I was good at being the calm in the worst moment. It turned out that was about to matter at 30,000 feet. And I was flying that day with my son to a job interview, for a job that had nothing to do with saving anybody. A corporate logistics job, a desk, a headset, decent money, real money, the kind I'd never once made in 15 years of pulling people back from the edge. Because here's the dirty little secret about the people who save your life for a living. We get paid almost nothing. I had given 15 years and a piece of my soul to that work, and I still couldn't afford the things my boy needed. And I was tired. And I was beaten down. And I had decided finally that love for the work wasn't enough, that I owed my son more than a hero father who couldn't pay for his braces, and so I was flying across the country to interview for a job I didn't want, to quit the only thing I'd ever been meant to do. That's the man who was sitting in 22A. A man who'd lost faith that what he did mattered to anybody. I want to be honest about how a person gets to that place, because I don't think I'm the only one, and maybe somebody listening is right there too. It isn't one big thing. It's 10,000 small ones. It's working a holiday and missing your kid's morning because somebody had to. It's coming home shaking from a call you couldn't save and having nobody to tell, because who wants to hear it? It's doing the actual math at the kitchen table at midnight, the rent against the paycheck, and realizing that the man who saved 3 lives that week can't afford the dentist for his own son. It's the slow, grinding understanding that the world claps for you in the abstract and pays you like you're nothing in the particular. People will call you a hero all day long. Heroes, it turns out, qualify for very little. And after 15 years of it, something in me had just quietly worn through, like a rope that frays one strand at a time until one day it's just gone. I didn't lose my love for the work. I lost my belief that loving the work was allowed to be enough, when there was a little boy depending on me to be more than a hero. That's a particular kind of heartbreak, giving up the thing you were born to do, not because you stopped loving it, but because loving it stopped being something you could afford. I have to tell you about my son, because he's the heart of this. My boy Micah is 8 years old. His mother and I divorced when he was small, and she's a good mom, and she's in his life, but the custody splits mean a lot of Micah's days are with me, and that boy is everything. And here's the thing about Micah, the thing that was breaking me a little. Micah thought I was a superhero. He'd tell anybody who'd listen, "My dad saves people. My dad's an ambulance man." He had a little toy ambulance he'd had since he was 3. To Micah, his father's job wasn't underpaid and invisible and exhausting. It was the coolest, most important job in the entire world, and I was about to take him on a plane to go quit it, because I couldn't make it add up. I hadn't told him yet what the trip was really for. I didn't have the heart. He thought we were just going on a daddy-son trip. I was going to break his heart on the way home, when I told him his dad wasn't going to be the ambulance man anymore. You have to understand about that toy ambulance. He'd had it since he was 3. The paint was worn off the corners, one of the little back doors was long gone, and it had a siren button that had stopped working years ago, and Micah loved it the way you love something holy. He slept with it for a while when he was little. When the divorce happened and his world got split into 2 houses and 2 bedrooms, that ambulance went back and forth with him, the one constant object, because it was his and because it was me. He'd push it across the floor, making the siren sound with his own mouth since the button died. "Hoo, out of the way, Dad's coming." And he'd narrate these little rescues, always with the same hero. "Dad's coming, Dad will fix it." And at his school, when they did the thing where the kids say what their parent does while other kids said lawyer and manager and sells insurance, my Micah stood up and said, "My dad saves people's lives," and he said it like he was the luckiest boy in the room, like he'd won something the others hadn't, and I was about to fly him across the country and come home and tell him that hero was hanging it up to go work at a desk. I had not been able to make myself say the words yet. Every time I looked at him pushing that ambulance across the carpet, the words died in my throat. So I just hadn't told him. Coward that I was, I decided to wait until the trip was nearly over. So that's where my head was, in seat 22A. Brooding, defeated, half asleep with my boy's head on my shoulder, flying toward the end of the only thing I was proud of. And then, up in first class, a woman started to scream. I'd been sitting there with the window shade down, Micah dozing against my arm with his headphones on, and that toy ambulance clutched in his lap even now, even at 8, even on a plane. And I'd been running the interview in my head, the things I'd say, the enthusiasm I'd have to fake for a job moving freight around on a screen, and I'd been feeling that hollow sick feeling of a man about to sign away the best part of himself for the right reasons. I remember looking down at my own hands on the tray table, these hands that had done so much, and thinking, well, old friends, I guess we're going to learn to type. That's the literal thought I was having. I was grieving my own hands. And right then, right at the bottom of that low moment, the sound came through the cabin from up front, past the curtain, and it cut through everything, because it was a sound I knew in my bones. Not a startled scream, not a frightened one. It was the specific, bottomless animal sound a parent makes when their child is dying in their arms, a sound that does not exist for any other reason, a sound I had heard too many times to ever mistake for anything else. And my body was already moving before my mind had decided anything at all. Now I want to tell you about the woman, because people are going to want her to be the villain of this story, and she wasn't. Her name, I'd learn later, was Adrienne Knox, and she was, by any measure, one of the most successful people on that airplane, the CEO of a large company, flying first class with her husband and their baby daughter. A powerful woman. The kind of person used to being the most capable person in any room, used to handling things, used to her money, and her competence solving whatever came up. And none of it, not $1 of it, not one bit of her power, could help her when her baby stopped breathing. What happened, as best I pieced it together, was the kind of thing that happens to babies and terrifies every parent alive. The little girl, maybe 9 months old, had been fussing, feeding, and something went wrong. She aspirated, she choked. Something got into her airway, and she couldn't clear it, and she stopped being able to breathe. And in the space of about 15 seconds, a routine first-class flight became every parent's worst nightmare, with a mother holding a baby who was silent and going dusky and not getting air. I heard the scream, that specific scream, the one I'd heard 100 times on the job, the sound a human being makes when their child is dying in their arms, and 15 years of training picked me up out of that seat before my brain had even caught up. I said to Micah, "Stay here, buddy, I'll be right back." And I was moving up the aisle, and there was a flight attendant on the intercom with her voice shaking asking if there was a doctor on board, and people were half standing, looking around, and nobody was answering, and I came through the curtain into first class and I saw it. Adrienne Knox on her knees in the aisle. The baby in her arms, limp, the color all wrong. The husband white as a sheet, frozen the way people freeze. A flight attendant trying to remember her training and losing the thread because it's different when it's real. And that whole cabin full of powerful, wealthy, accomplished people, every one of them helpless, because money and titles do not teach you how to save a choking infant, and in that moment the only currency that mattered was something none of them had. I want you to really picture that cabin, because I've never seen anything lay the world so bare. There were, I would guess, 15 or 20 people in that first-class section, and they were, by the numbers, some of the most powerful people on Earth. There was real money in those leather seats. There were people in there who ran things, who employed thousands, who were used to snapping their fingers and watching the world rearrange itself. And every one of them was sitting there with their hands useless in their laps, pale, frozen, looking at each other and at the dying baby and at the screaming mother. And not one single thing they had ever accomplished or earned or bought was worth a nickel in that moment. Their money couldn't breathe for that baby. Their titles couldn't open that airway. All the power in that cabin added up to exactly nothing, because the universe occasionally arranges a moment to remind us what actually matters, and in those moments it isn't the things we spend our whole lives chasing. It's whether somebody in the room knows what to do with their hands. And the only person on that entire aircraft who knew what to do with his hands was the tired man and coach who'd been about to quit doing it. And I'll tell you, kneeling down next to that mother, the strangest calm came over me. The same calm I'd felt 1,000 times, the calm that 15 years builds into your bones. I'd done this exact thing before, or near enough to it. I once cleared a toddler's airway on the floor of a grocery store, while the whole produce section stood frozen around me. I once kept a man breathing in a ditch for 19 minutes until the helicopter came. The setting changes. The work is always the same. Somebody is leaving this world, and your job is to reach in and pull them back calmly, with whatever you've got, while everyone around you comes apart. I had been doing that work so long that I'd stopped being able to see how rare it was, how few people on Earth can do it, because to me it was just Tuesday. It took a first-class cabin full of titans of industry, every one of them helpless, to show me by contrast what my ordinary hands actually were. You don't see your own gift clearly until you're standing in a room full of people who don't have it. In the one moment, it's the only thing that matters. I went down on my knees next to her, and I said the sentence I've said 1,000 times, the one that's designed to cut through a panicking person's terror. "Ma'am, I'm a paramedic. I need you to let me help her. Give her to me." And there's a thing that happens. When a drowning person hears a calm, competent voice tell them exactly what to do, they grab it like a rope. She looked at me, this powerful woman absolutely shattered with fear, and she heard paramedic, and she handed me her baby. Now, I'm not going to walk you through the medical details because this isn't a how-to and a panicking person should always call for real help, but I'll tell you the shape of it. That baby had an obstruction. Her airway was blocked, and she could not move air, and she was running out of time fast, the way babies do, because they're so small and they have so little reserve. The standard things you do for a choking infant, I did them fast, the back blows, the careful positioning, everything my training had drilled into me 10,000 times. And it wasn't clearing. And I could see in about 4 seconds that I was going to lose her if I couldn't get that airway open another way. And we were 30,000 feet up with no hospital and no equipment and no time. I need you to understand the math of those seconds, because that's where the whole thing lived. A baby that small has almost no reserve. An adult can go minutes. A tiny infant has a window you can count on one hand. I could feel it closing. And there's a thing that happens to a good medic in that window that I can only describe as time slowing down and the whole rest of the world falling away. The screaming, the crowd, the husband, the fear, my own exhaustion, the fact that I was about to quit, all of it just vanished. And there was nothing in the entire universe except this little girl and her airway and the problem of how to get air past whatever was blocking it, right now, with nothing. 15 years of training is for exactly that window. It's so that when your hands are the only thing between a child and the end, you don't freeze, you don't panic, you don't reach for the thing you wish you had, you work the problem with what's in front of you. And what was in front of me, when the standard moves didn't clear it, was a service cart, and a cabin full of drinks, and a thought from the very back of my training, the last resort kind, the kind you hope your whole career you'll never need. And that's when I looked up and said the word that probably sounded insane to everyone watching. I said, I need a straw, a drinking straw, right now, go. Because there's a thing you can do in the worst case when an airway is blocked and you have no equipment. An improvised way to get air past an obstruction or to clear it. A thing a good medic knows about and prays they'll never have to do. And a stiff drinking straw in trained hands can be the difference. I'm deliberately not telling you how, because in the wrong hands it could hurt a child, and the right answer for you is always to call for trained help. But I had 15 years of the right hands, and a flight attendant slapped a drinking straw into my palm about 3 seconds later, and the whole cabin held its breath, and I did the thing I knew how to do. I will never forget those few seconds as long as I live. The whole world had narrowed to the size of that one small body in my hands. I was aware, dimly, of the silence. A cabin full of people who an instant before had been shouting and crying, now gone absolutely still. Every eye on what I was doing, because they all understood without being told that they were watching the line between a child living and a child dying, and that it ran straight through the hands of a stranger from coach. I wasn't aware of being a hero, or being watched, or being anything. I was aware only of the baby, and the airway, and the long-trained certainty of my own hands, moving on their own, doing the careful, precise, last resort thing they'd been taught for exactly this and had prayed never to need. There was no room in me for doubt. Doubt is a luxury for afterward. In the moment there is only the work and the calm, and I let 15 years carry my hands, and I felt the obstruction give, and I felt the airway open, and for one endless half-second the whole universe waited to see if it had been in time. And the baby coughed, and then the baby cried, that thin, furious, beautiful sound of a baby screaming her head off, which is the most wonderful sound in the entire world, because a screaming baby is a breathing baby. The obstruction cleared, the air went in, that little girl pinked right up and started howling with rage and life, and the entire first-class cabin made a sound I'll never forget, this collective sob of relief, and Adrienne Knox grabbed her daughter back and clutched her and just came apart completely. And the husband was crying, and the flight attendants were crying, and I sat back on my heels in that aisle in my rumpled coach clothes and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 15 years. People ask me sometimes what that feels like, the moment a life comes back under your hands, and the honest answer is that it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like collapse. All the calm you summoned, all the ice you kept in your veins to do the work, it all comes due the second the danger passes, and your hands start to shake and your eyes sting, and you feel about 100 years old. I'd had that feeling 100 times in the back of an ambulance, alone, with no one to see it. But this time, kneeling in that aisle, I felt the whole weight of 15 years come down on me at once. Every life I'd saved and every one I hadn't, all of it, and underneath it, rising up through it, the strangest thought, clear as a bell. This. This is the thing. This is the thing I was about to throw away. And I almost couldn't breathe around it, not from the effort, but from the size of what I'd nearly walked away from, which I could suddenly see whole, the way you see your house clearly only when you're about to lose it. And then I looked back down the aisle, through the first-class curtain, and there was Micah. He hadn't stayed in his seat. Of course he hadn't. My 8-year-old had crept up the aisle and was standing at the curtain, watching, and his face, I will never forget his face. Because my son had just watched his dad do the thing he'd always bragged about, the thing he had a toy ambulance for, the thing he told everybody at school. He'd just watched his dad save a baby's life with his bare hands and a drinking straw, 30,000 feet in the air. And the look on that little boy's face was pure, total, blazing pride. Like his whole understanding of the world had just been confirmed. My dad saves people. He'd always said it, and now he'd seen it. And here's what undid me. He wasn't surprised. That's the thing I keep coming back to. An 8-year-old watches his father save a dying baby with a drinking straw on an airplane, and the look on his face wasn't shock, wasn't disbelief. It was confirmation. It was the face of a boy watching the world finally show everybody else the thing he had known since he was 3 years old, pushing a toy ambulance across the floor. Of course, Dad saved the baby. Dad saves people. That's just what Dad is. He'd been telling everyone for years, and now the whole first-class cabin of important grown-ups had seen it too, and I watched my son stand a little taller at that curtain, not because he'd learned something new, but because the world had finally caught up to what he already knew. And I knelt there looking at that, at the absolute uncomplicated faith in my little boy's face, and I thought about the speech I'd been planning to give him on the flight home, and I felt sick with how close I'd come, and grateful in a way I don't have words for that I'd found out in time. And something cracked open in my chest, kneeling in that aisle, looking at my son's face. Because in a day or two, at the end of this very trip, I was going to tell that boy his dad was quitting being the ambulance man. And looking at his face in that curtain, I understood, all at once, and for the first time in months, what I'd been about to do. I'd been about to teach my son that the most important work a person can do isn't worth doing if it doesn't pay enough. I'd been about to take the thing he was proudest of in the whole world and trade it for a desk and a headset, and call it being a good father. Let me tell you what happened after, because it matters. The plane made an emergency landing so the baby could be checked at a hospital, and she was completely fine, totally fine, no harm done, because the airway got cleared in time. And in the chaos of the landing and the paramedics coming aboard, my people, the same uniform I'd worn for 15 years, walking up that jet bridge with their bags, I did the thing you do, gave them the quick, clean handoff, what happened, what I'd done, what to watch for, one professional to another, and I watched the lead medic's eyes when he realized what I'd pulled off with a drinking straw and no kit, and he gave me a small nod, the kind of nod that passes between people who do this work and means more than any speech. The nod that says, "You're one of us. Good job. I know exactly what that took." That nod was worth more to me than any check, and I think it was the first moment I started to understand what I'd nearly thrown away. And then, once the baby was safely in their hands and being carried off to be checked, Adrienne Knox found me. She was still shaking, and she grabbed both my hands, this powerful woman, and she couldn't even get words out at first, and then she said, "You saved her. Nobody could. There were 100 people and nobody, and you just, who are you?" And I said, "I'm just a paramedic, ma'am. It's what I do. It's what a lot of us do every day. You just don't usually see it." The husband couldn't even speak at first. He just gripped my shoulder hard, and his whole face was working. And finally he got out, "You were 16 rows back. If you'd been on a different flight, if you'd taken a different seat." And he couldn't finish because the thought of it was too big. How close his daughter had come to the version of that day where there was no paramedic in 22A, where the cabin shouted for a doctor and there simply wasn't one, and a baby died at 30,000 feet for want of one trained pair of hands. I've thought about that too. How thin the margin was. How much of it was luck, that I was on that flight at all, on my way to quit, which means the very desperation that was driving me out of the work had put me in that seat. If I'd quit a month earlier, I'd have had no reason to take that trip. The work I was running from was the only reason I was there to do it one last time. I don't know what to call that. I've stopped trying to name it. I just know that little girl is alive because a worn-out medic hadn't quite managed to walk away yet. And then she did the thing wealthy people do, the thing that comes from a good place but doesn't quite understand. She started talking about money, about rewarding me, about how there was no amount. She'd give me anything, name it, a number, anything at all for the life of her child. And I stopped her gently, the same way I'd stopped her panic earlier. I said, "Ma'am, I can't take money for this. I know you mean it kindly, but I didn't save your daughter for a reward. I did it because it's who I am, and if I take a check for it, it stops being who I am and starts being a transaction. Please, just go, take care of that beautiful little girl. That's all the thanks any of us ever really want." And she looked at me, and I watched something land on her, something real, and she said, "But your son told one of the attendants you were flying to a job interview, to leave this work." Because my Micah, had been talking, the way he does, and I was embarrassed, but I told her the truth. I said, "Yeah, I was. I love this work more than anything I've ever done, but I've got that boy to raise, and the truth is, you cannot raise a child on what we get paid to save your lives. So I was going to go take a desk job I'll hate to give my son the things he needs. That's just the math of it, ma'am. There's no villain, it's just the math." And while I was saying it, my Micah had come up beside me and slipped his hand into mine, and Adrienne Knox looked down at him, at this 8-year-old still holding his beat-up toy ambulance even now, and then she looked at me, and I watched her put it together, that the man who'd just saved her daughter was about to stop being able to do that work, to be a father to this very boy, and that there was something obscene about a world arranged that way. She crouched down to Micah's level, this powerful woman, right there on the jet bridge, and she said, "Your dad is the bravest man on this whole airplane, you know that?" And Micah looked at her like she'd said the sky was blue, and he said, simple as anything, "I know, he's the bravest man everywhere." And I had to look away, because a thing like that, out of your kid's mouth, on a day like that, will undo a grown man completely. And Adrienne Knox got very quiet. And then she said something I've thought about every day since. She said, "I have spent 20 years building a company and being told I'm one of the most valuable people in my industry. And I just watched a man who makes a fraction of what I make do the single most valuable thing I have ever seen a human being do, and then turn down a blank check for it because it would cheapen it. I think I have had the whole thing upside down. I think we all have." And then she said something else, quieter, almost to herself, that I've never forgotten. She said, "My whole life people have told me I'm valuable. Investors, boards, magazines. And I believed them because the numbers were big. But nobody's life ever depended on me being good at my job. Not really. If I'm gone tomorrow, someone else runs the company by Friday. And here's a man whose hands are the difference between a child living and dying, an actual irreplaceable thing, and the world pays him like he's nothing and pays me like I'm everything. We've got the price tag switched, the whole society has the price tag switched, and most of us never find out until we're on our knees in an aisle." I didn't say anything to that, because there was nothing to add. She'd seen it. You can't unsee it once you've seen it. The richest woman on the plane had just learned, the hard way, in the one moment money couldn't help her. Exactly where the real value in this world is kept, and it isn't where any of us are taught to look. Now, I told you I wouldn't take a reward, and I didn't. But I want to tell you what I did accept, because there's a difference, and it's the whole point. Adrienne Knox didn't try to write me a check again. She understood by then that it would have been wrong. Instead, she did something smarter and kinder and harder. Over the following weeks, and she stayed in touch, this woman, she didn't just disappear once the fear wore off, she set about using what she actually had, which wasn't just money but influence and a platform and a company, to go at the real problem. The thing I'd called just the math. She couldn't fix the pay of every paramedic in the country, much as I think she wanted to. But she did something for the people in my city. She funded a program, not named after anybody, she insisted on that, just a quiet working program that helps emergency medical workers in our region with the exact thing that was driving people like me out. The gap between what the work is worth and what it pays. help with housing, with childcare, with the things that let a person afford to keep doing the job that doesn't pay enough, so that the next medic with a kid to raise wouldn't have to fly across the country to quit. She insisted, when she set it up, that it carry no name at all. Not hers, not mine, not the baby's. She said the second you put a name on a thing like that, it becomes about the name, and she wanted it to be about the medics and nobody else. I argued she should at least let people know she'd done a good thing. She runs a company. The goodwill alone would have been worth it. She wouldn't hear of it. She said she'd spent her whole life making sure her name was on things, and that this was the first thing she'd ever built that she wanted to be invisible, the way the work itself is invisible, and that maybe that was the point. I didn't argue after that. A powerful person learning to do good quietly, with no credit, is a rarer thing than the money. That afternoon changed her. I've watched it hold. And for me, specifically, she did the one thing that let me stay who I am. She didn't make me rich. She knew better than to insult me with that. What she did was help me set up something I'd never had the means to do, a way to keep being a paramedic full-time while also training others, teaching the improvised, no equipment, real-world skills that save lives when the ambulance is 20 minutes away, the stuff you can only learn from somebody who's done it. A proper role, a respected one, that paid like the work mattered. She didn't pull me out of the work. She built me a way to stay in it and survive. That was the gift. Not a fortune. A future doing the thing I was made for. I want to dwell on why that mattered so much, why it was so much better than a check would have been, because I think it's the most important thing in this whole story. A check would have solved my money problem for a while and left the actual wound exactly where it was, which was that a man who'd found his calling was being forced by the world to abandon it. A check treats the symptom. What Adrienne Knox did treated the disease. She didn't make me a rich man who used to be a paramedic. She made me a paramedic who could finally afford to stay one. Do you see the difference? One is charity. The other is justice in miniature for one man. She looked at the actual problem, which was that the world had made my calling and my fatherhood into enemies, forced me to choose between the work that saved lives and the son I was raising, and she used what she had to take the choice away so I could be both. There is no check on earth worth as much as that. She gave me back the ability to be the man my son already thought I was. That's not a reward. That's something closer to grace. I never took the desk job. I called and canceled the interview from the airport before we even flew home. And on that flight home, the one where I'd planned to break my son's heart, I told Micah something completely different instead. I told him his dad was going to be the ambulance man for a long, long time. And he looked at me like that was the most obvious thing in the world, like, why would I ever be anything else? And he said, I know, Dad, you save people. That's your whole job. 8 years old, he'd never had a single doubt. I was the one who'd lost the thread. It took my own kid to hold it for me. I called and canceled that interview standing at a bank of windows in the terminal while Micah ate a pretzel and narrated a rescue with his battered ambulance on the windowsill. Hoo-hoo. And the woman on the phone was confused and a little put out, and I told her I was sorry to waste her time, but I just remembered what I was for. She didn't understand that. That's fine. I barely understood it myself yet. I just knew it was true. And then I sat down next to my son at that gate, and I watched him play, and I thought about how I'd been about to teach him the single worst lesson a father can teach, that you should give up who you really are if the money's bad enough. That a calling is a luxury. That the measure of a man's work is the size of his paycheck. He'd have learned it from watching me, the way kids learn the deepest things, not from what we say, but from what we do. And instead, by an accident of a choking baby and a drinking straw, he'd learned the opposite, the true thing, that what you're for is worth fighting to keep, and that the most important work in the world is the kind where somebody's life is in your hands, no matter what it pays. I'll take a lifetime of being underpaid over teaching my boy that lesson wrong. It took me almost 40 years and a stranger's emergency to remember it. He'd known it at 3. I think about that whole day all the time now. About a first-class cabin full of the most successful people in the country, and how every dollar and every title in that cabin was worth exactly nothing in the one moment that mattered most. about how a baby's life came down to a guy in coach and a 99-cent box of drinking straws, about how the whole world is set up to tell people like me, the medics, the nurses, the firefighters, the teachers, the people who do the work that actually holds the world together, that we're worth less than the people in first class, when the truth that whole cabin saw with their own eyes is exactly the opposite. Think about who actually holds your life in their hands when you really need it. Not the people on the magazine covers. It's the medic and the nurse and the firefighter. It's the teacher who notices the kid who's drowning quietly in the back row. It's the person who shows up at your worst moment and knows what to do, and then goes home to a paycheck that says, the world thinks they're ordinary. Have built a whole society that pays people in inverse proportion to how badly we'd miss them if they vanished. Let half the bankers on Earth disappear tomorrow, and most of us wouldn't feel it for a week. Let the medics and the nurses and the teachers vanish, and the world stops by lunchtime. We know this. Some part of us knows it. We just arrange very hard not to look at it, because looking at it would mean admitting we've got the whole thing backwards, the way Adrienne Knox admitted it on her knees in that aisle. It usually takes an emergency. It shouldn't. We shouldn't need a baby to stop breathing to remember who the valuable people really are. But we do, most of us, and so the least I can do is say it plainly now, while nobody's life is on the line. The valuable people are the ones who'd be missed in an emergency. Go find yours and tell them so today. The most valuable person on that airplane was not the CEO. It was not the wealth, the power, the titles. It was a tired, underpaid, almost quit paramedic in seat 22A who'd forgotten his own worth until a stranger's baby reminded him of it. And the second most valuable thing on that plane was the look on an 8-year-old's face, watching from the curtain, who'd known what his dad was worth all along. That night, after we finally got home, I tucked Micah into his own bed, the toy ambulance parked on the nightstand where it always goes, and he was almost asleep when he said, in that drifting voice kids get, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to save people like you do." And I sat there in the dark on the edge of his bed for a long time after he'd fallen asleep, because just a day before, I'd have heard that and felt my heart break, would have thought, no, baby, pick something that pays, pick something easier, don't choose the life that wore your father down. But that night I heard it different. That night I thought, if my boy grows up to be the calm pair of hands in somebody's worst moment, the one who knows what to do when everyone else falls apart, then I will have raised a richer man than anyone in that first-class cabin, no matter what his paycheck ever says. And I leaned over and kissed his head, and I whispered, I hope you do, buddy. I really hope you do. And I meant it all the way down, which just a day before I could not have done. That's what that baby and that straw gave back to me. They gave me back the truth in time to hand it to my son, instead of robbing him of it. So here's the thing I want to leave you with. There is someone in your life who does that kind of work. The quiet, essential, underpaid, taken for granted work that the world only notices the second they need it. A nurse, a medic, a teacher, the person who shows up at the worst moment and just quietly knows what to do. Tell them. Don't wait for the emergency to find out what they're worth. Tell them now. And down in the comments, tell me about the one who saved you, or saved somebody you love. The quiet professional who walked into your worst day and made it survivable. Say their name, they almost never get to hear it. I don't get to choose who I help. The call comes and I go, whoever it is, rich or poor, kind or cruel, first class or seat 22A, that's the oath, and I love it. But you get to choose.